and welcome back to Baphomet's Cozy Perch. Today we will be talking about Greek and Roman gods, which is exciting. Really, it's Greek gods that were then adapted and renamed by Roman
Yeah, just kind of like taken
people.
and made, yeah.
Much like their statues. And architecture and all sorts of other things. We're not going to get into that though. Today we're talking about Zeus / Jupiter and Hades /
Pluto.
Pluto. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's so obvious. I don't know why that wasn't the first thing that came into my head.
It just happens to be
But,
like that.
Brain fart. So, yeah, very exciting topic today. We're both huge fans of mythology and stuff like that. So, it was exciting to kind of delve into this a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Do we start with, we talk about good and evil,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I feel like backstory is a little important for
Yeah.
Zeus and,
Yeah.
right? For Zeus and Hades.
Mm-hmm.
So, we start with the original gods, which are the Titans,
Mm-hmm.
right? And their names, gosh
Cronus and
darn it.
Reyes.
Thank
Cronus
you.
and Reyes.
Yeah, so Cronus and Reyes have several children.
Yes, as all of this mythological stuff is, they all have many, many children.
Yeah, lots of children that Cronus eats whole every time they're born.
Well, he eats them whole
Swallows them.
because he's told that one of his children will overthrow the throne when they're old enough to. So to counteract that, he just eats his kids when they're born.
Yeah. A common thing for some reason in Greek storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
because we also have the story of Oedipus,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who it's basically the same kind of thing where the parents are told that Oedipus is going to do all these awful things. So they're like, all right, well, let's get rid of him.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, as things always happen, fate is not that kind.
Yep.
And everything comes true in the end anyway, right? Like people kind of self-sabotage because they're messing with fate.
Yep.
So, much as Oedipus comes back and accidentally kills his father and marries his mother, Cronus's kids do overtake
Yes.
the throne, if you want to call it that,
Mm-hmm.
the realm, the
Mm-hmm.
land. What would be the proper term there?
I would use the term realm, but that's like my thought process. I don't know. Olympus, if you will. When the children are being eaten, Reyes actually saves Zeus from being eaten by taking him and putting him somewhere else for a while. And then he comes back as a cupbearer in disguise to his father and poisons his father, and he then vomits up the children. Zeus. So that's like kind of a weird random tidbit of theme, is that like in succession as they were actually born, it went Hades, Poseidon, and then Zeus. So Hades
and
was
then a bunch
the
of
eldest
girls.
brother. Yeah, Hera and Hestia. They were all kind of before them. They were elder sisters, and then the boys were born.
Right.
But when Zeus was saved, obviously he was the only somewhat living person in that moment. So then once they were regurgitated from their father, then Zeus became the eldest / youngest brother, and Hades became the youngest / eldest brother. And I just thought that was a very strange, because I
think that's why my brain I think that's why my brain automatically thought that Hades was the one that saved them, because he's the youngest.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not actually the youngest. He's technically the oldest.
Yeah,
but
they're both, because they kept saying that the youngest and
weird.
oldest, the youngest and oldest. And I was like, okay, which one is it? So when they were
What are you talking
born,
about?
it was Hades, Poseidon, Zeus. But then once they were regurgitated, it was Zeus, Poseidon, Hades.
Hades. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so they decide to basically overthrow, right? I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the fact that their father swallowed all of them.
Yes.
And so they win
Mm-hmm.
in the war.
Titamaki, the Titanomachy. Hold on, there's a word.
Yeah, I can't even say it. So
Tatanamaki, something like that. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Not that that's important, but I
If
kept
any of
trying to
you are Greek, don't add us for
so sorry.
pronunciation. We're very sorry. They win and they take over, and there's basically different realms to the earth, right? There's 3 different realms, conveniently enough for the 3 brothers. So, right?
None for the girls, only for the men, of course.
Of course, well, yeah, of course. That's a whole nother discussion. Well, you know. But so you've got the sky and you've got water. Interestingly enough, land was not included. So it was sky, water, underworld, which I thought
Mhm.
was very interesting. And ground was neutral for all 3 of them. I thought that was a very interesting way of putting it. And I didn't really delve too deep into why that was or like what the thought process was behind that, why the ground was neutral
I'm
or
not
not
sure.
given.
I feel like perhaps it's more like that was humanity's area, but I also do know
Mm.
that Hades was in control, and we can talk about this when we talk about Hades, but he was also in control of like the wealth of the soil, so like
I was
hidden
gonna say
gems and stuff.
riches.
So
Mhm.
like, that is kind of part of the ground, like when they're talking about like minerals. So it's not like all neutral, but
Yeah, yeah.
as like the earth portion, yeah, nobody, it's, I guess they're just like, nah, humanity.
So they divided up and they basically played that game that we all played when we were little when we didn't want to do something where you had like a big straw and a bunch of little straws and whoever got the big straw won. And Zeus basically won.
Shocking.
Shocking. Yeah, right. So Zeus gets the sky, which also includes, the god realm. So he gets to rule the good cushy part. Poseidon gets the sea, and Hades gets the underworld. And like
Mhm.
you said, he also gets technically the riches that come with that because that's under the soil, hidden gems and riches, gold and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, and Hades was not particularly happy with his lot, from what I read, or at least that was what kind of the legend was that he was not necessarily the happiest
Mhm.
that he had gotten the underworld. Which, yeah, can't blame the guy. Especially because he was originally the oldest brother, so I'm sure he felt a little bit of like
Just a little cheated.
I kind of right, yeah, like, you kind of feel like, I really should be kind of in control, but
Mhm.
so he gets put into the underworld, and from what I remember, they don't have the best relationship after that, Hades and Zeus. They're not, like, best you know what I
I mean,
mean?
just from what I've read, I feel like, and I'm sure there are a lot of different types of, writings of it. But what I read was basically, I don't know that from the information that I got that there really was like a particular relationship between them. I read that Hades was more just kind of like where he was, and he didn't come back up. There wasn't like a relationship, but it wasn't like a bad one. It was just kind of like what it was.
Mm,
There were like specific myths where they interacted a little bit, but from what I read, perhaps they weren't like the more emotionally written ones. It didn't really seem like there was like a particularly bad relationship, just that it just wasn't, they weren't like buddy buddy.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. So, okay, so in terms of kind of the good and evil aspects of it, the Greeks you kind of associate, I guess, when you think about it, you associate Zeus kind of with good and Hades with evil, which is a little unfair because it's like just because he, you know,
Yeah.
got put into that lot and ended up in the underworld, does that make him an evil person? Um, oh, and at the same time, we're talking Zeus and Hades, but we also were kind of including, like we said, Jupiter and Pluto in this as well. And that's because, like we touched on, they're basically the same gods. The
Yeah.
Romans took heavy influences from the Greeks. And
Extremely.
it's practically the same story. They just gave them different names and they assigned them to planets because the Romans were much more into planets and astrology and things like that. In terms of origin story, is the origin story the same? My brain is so it's very
It's
similar.
it's similar in what I've read, the Roman version of the origin stories and just kind of the gods in general, or like the LaCroix version of the Greek, mythology. They just kind of
Mhm.
took the main points and gave it to them, and they weren't really super focused with kind of the origin stories. But
Right.
from what I did read, Jupiter, with same situation. He was, siblings with all these people, and his father tried to eat all of them and all of that. Uh, but I just don't think that there was so much of it. Like his personality in general was just a little bit more watered down and was more kind of grand than perhaps Zeus's personality was. He was a little bit more eh. But
Yeah.
as far as origin goes, it's just kind of focused on like the good stuff and like the major things. I couldn't find much information like explaining the origins more than I could find the explanation of the Greek origins. So it was just very
Yeah.
simple in a watered down way.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was getting stuck too, because a lot of it, it's like I was trying to research, Jupiter and Pluto Roman mythology, and a lot of it was just coming up with Zeus and Hades.
That's
Like,
what
it
it.
was just kind of
Yeah,
yeah, they weren't showing me separate things, it was just like, "Oh, another word for Zeus." And I was
yeah.
like, "Oh."
Yeah, and they used, from what I read, they used the gods Pluto and Jupiter a little bit more in terms of political situations and political stances and maybe luck, as opposed to like the whole on worship that the
Yeah.
Greek gods were worshipped by, because they really were planted in Rome, hence Roman, and then kind of swept out from there. So, yeah,
Right,
more
right.
of a political stance and a worshiping than like a whole religion than Greek mythology.
Yeah. Yeah. So we are kind of talking about both, but really the majority of personality and stories and things like that, it comes from the Greeks. It doesn't come so much from the Romans. So you'll hear
Right.
us mostly refer to them as Zeus and Hades cuz
Right.
that's really where a lot of the stories come from. So, if we're talking in terms of good and evil and where they are on the spectrum, I think they're both really fascinating actually to talk to about that because I find it interesting that we do have that association of like Zeus being like the good ruler, he's the guy, he's the good guy, right? He's like the god kind of, right? Like that's how people kind of correlate him in today's term, right? You would say that people tend to take Zeus and correlate him with like God, like a Christian God. They kind of think of him as being like that top pillar. Um, and so thereby also they associate the same types of characteristics of being like good and wanting a lot of good things for humanity and wanting people to act their best and stuff like that. Whereas really when you look in Greek mythology, the gods were actually very selfish.
Extremely, especially Zeus.
They Yeah, they really didn't care about humanity or what happened to the humans in reality. When you really think about it, they were kind of like they just wanted them to be there and do things that they needed them to do on Earth and like not cause trouble. Cuz they wanted everything for themselves. They wanted the humans. The humans were there to do things for the gods
Hmm.
and bring things to them rather than like I think if you look at today's religion and you think of God in terms of like a Christianity sense, God is kind of there overseeing everything, wanting everybody to like be the best person they can be, right? And like live the best life they can live. And he's portrayed as a little bit more of like a fatherly figure. And that is definitely not the Greek god of Zeus or any of
No.
the Greek gods.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Yeah, they're more like a lot of them are more like, what kind of mischief can we get into?
It felt more like a game. It certainly did.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually think that Hades was the least, like, manipulative a lot of times, personally, in terms of what I've read.
Well, yeah, yeah,
He was
yeah.
right? Like, he kind of was like, "I'm here, you die, I collect your soul. It's cool." I think the biggest story for me in terms of Hades being maybe on that kind of not great spectrum, the evil spectrum, if you will say, is the fact that like his wife really he stole her. I
Yeah.
mean, his wife was not like, it was not a mutual thing. It was not like even an arranged marriage. Like he full on like kidnapped her and was like,
Yeah, when he
"You're
took
my
Persephone,
wife."
he was just kind of like, yeah, yeah, all right. And
I could use a woman down here.
even his evil, his evil, even his like his bad deeds were kind of like half-assed. He was just like, yeah, she's cool. Like I'll make a really extremely pretty flower and then pop up in my chariot and take her down. Like,
Yeah,
sick.
it's cool. She can only come back up for certain periods of times occasionally.
That was due to the conversation that he did have with Zeus afterwards. Or yeah, between those two things. But what a funny thing. I mean, but even then, he was just kind of like, yeah, whatever, because he was down there, and then Demeter, her mom, was like, I hate everything. My daughter's not here. I can't find her. And then famine started happening, and so they were like, okay, listen, we don't need the humanity to die right now. So we're going to need to find Persephone so that we can bring her back, so that Demeter can come back. It's fine. So they, I can't remember who locates Persephone, but basically Zeus has to intervene and like tell someone to go find Persephone. They find her in Hades' home in the underworld, and like, okay, listen, Hades, listen, pal, having some problems. We're gonna need Persephone back. And he was like, that's totally cool, but she definitely ate a pomegranate seed, which means that she's connected to the underworld. So she can't like not be here forever. So what's gonna happen is this: she can spend 2/3 of the year on Earth with her mom, but she's got to spend 1/3 of the year here because she's connected to the underworld. And they're like, yeah, okay, seems legit.
Yeah.
Thus the seasons.
Yeah, really. And then that's literally how we get spring.
Yeah, and winter months are, when she's gone and her mom's all sad. And I'm just like, even like the the discussion was just kind of like, yeah, sure, sounds good.
Yeah. Like he didn't even really want her that much. He was just like, it'd be nice to have someone down here with me, you know? And in true, male fashion, no one asked her. No one thought, what do you think she wants? He just kind of took her and she just kind of had to go with it. And I didn't even really find a lot on whether or not she liked that. Like there was no like backstory on her. She really had no personality in terms of like they never thought that through. Like it was the Greeks never thought about like,
Yeah, and that's a common theme where I feel like, even when Zeus goes and like, does some bad things to women, it's never like, and she was mad. Except for Hera. I think Hera was mad, but most of the time,
yeah.
it's just like, and then it happened. And then they had a
Yeah.
baby. And I'm like, was she okay with it? Hello?
Yeah. And moving on. And then they go and next thing Zeus does. That's it. Yeah, I think Hera is the only one that they do kind of give conflict to.
Mhm.
She's the only one who kind of stands up for herself, which is great.
But then she gets jealous,
Um,
so it was like, first she was
yeah,
mad, and so it was a whole thing, but
yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, in terms of Hades things, that's kind of the biggest for me. Kidnapping someone and just like deciding they have to stay with you, you know?
that's a little
Um,
bit of a yikes.
it's a little bit of a yikes. But yeah, like I said, for the most part, he was actually one of the gods that kind of didn't really fuss too much about anything. I find his portrayal in Disney really interesting. I think they gave him a lot more vindictive like qualities and stuff than the Greeks ever really gave him. Wanting to start a whole war and overthrow Zeus and stuff was kind of a Disney thing. I didn't
Uh,
really find
yeah,
much
well,
about
yeah,
that.
no, they just needed a conflict. They needed the bad guy to
Mhm.
have a conflict with the so and so good, so they gave him
Yeah.
that. But what I find very interesting, especially in that respect to Hercules, is that Hades apparently wasn't even like a part. He was like the overseer and the supervisor of like the souls being weighed and decided if they were guilty or not. But he
Mhm.
wasn't even like one of the judges, nor was he actually a person that like did the torturing or like the punishing for when they were guilty. That was up
Yeah.
to some of like, and there's whole lore behind them, and I won't go into it. But they're the Uranes, pretty much the Aranes, and one of them is named Megara, and I was like, that's so interesting that like they made that one
Hmm.
Megara. One of the people who originally were like one of the torturers of the soul, and like go out and like find the wicked people for to bring down to the underworld, and they named one of them Megara. I just thought that was so interesting. I'm like, how funny that that's where you decided to go with that. And she apparently was like the jealousy. She was that was her thing. So
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you could argue that even though Zeus isn't the one who did any of that stuff, right? He's not the one that actually tortured people. He just kind of oversaw and everything and made sure that like souls were collected. You could argue that that's just as bad, right?
true,
I mean,
true.
it's just as bad to be complacent with everything that's happening, but that's kind of his job. Like, he's sent to the underworld. People are supposed to be, I don't know if they're supposed to be tortured. I mean, I guess. But you know what I mean? People die. Their souls have to go somewhere. He's got to collect them. People do bad things or whatever, they have to be punished in some way. I mean, I get why he's there and his whole, uh it goes back to the Greeks, just like again any religion. You have to have something that tells people like the reason they don't want to do bad things, right? There
Yep.
has to be a reason, otherwise people are like, you know so he's kind of there for like a moral push, like you have to do these things, you have to be good, you have to not do certain things, otherwise this is what's going to happen, you're going to go to the underworld, you're going to be tortured by these people. Sadies might do, it's like Sadies, Hades.
Zadius, good old
I
Zadius.
But yeah, so you could argue that his complacency in things
Yeah,
is just as bad.
truly. Yeah, I mean, as with a
Mhm.
lot of the world, I think that is something you have to consider. That the lack of doing things is a lot of the times a problem, if not a bigger problem. But no one's trying to save these souls. They've just been weighed and are given the what do you want to call it, the decision,
Judgment.
the judgment. Thank you, that's a good word. The judgment of being pitiful, that's not the word, of being wicked. I think they use the word wicked a lot, or being
Mhm.
guilty.
Right, yeah, so for me, Hades is interesting more because of the complete, like, difference between the actual stories from Greek mythology and the Disney version, which is like what I grew up watching and a lot of other people grew up watching, your kind of first look as a kid into Greek mythology, and it's so, like, not really accurate at
No,
all.
no, not really, not much at all.
And so that's almost more fascinating to me than anything else, than just the actual stories. It's just like the comparison in my brain, because I am such a Disney person, is like wrapping my brain around like, oh, they just kind of made up whatever they wanted to in terms of Hades. And even Zeus, because they portray Zeus as very like loving and fun and jovial and
Yeah, that's
only
weird.
only right, in Hercules only gets his like lightning bolts and stuff out when he has to fight, and you're like, hmm,
What do we
hmm,
say? That's what he's like. I don't know about
hmm,
that.
interesting. It's kind of like, have you ever heard, one of the other things that Veronica and I both love is murder shows,
Yeah.
like true crime and things like that. And It to me, it reminds me of a lot of serial murderers and things. Stick with me here. It reminds me of a lot of serial murderers and things where you hear the interviews of people who knew them right before realizing that they were a serial murderer. You hear a lot of interviews with those people and they're like, "He was just the greatest guy, and I had no idea, no idea. He just seemed so nice, and I would never have known that he was doing all these, like, horrific things." That's how I feel with Disney's portrayal. Like, they
Mm-hmm.
portrayed him as, like, this great guy. He only gets his lightning bolt out when he has to. He's not purposefully causing problems, and then you delve into his story deep, and you're like, "God dang, this guy is a little crazy,"
Yeah,
you
he's
know?
a little cray
"What
cray.
happened? He seems so nice," you know? That's kind of how my brain feels about Zeus,
Yeah,
like, delving into his stories and some of the crap he's done. So, in terms of Zeus, I don't know. I don't even know where you put him because I would put him really pretty far on the evil scale. He's very vindictive
yeah, he's very
and he's very
selfish.
selfish. Yeah.
Mhm, and I mean, that's what I feel like that's kind of what is a big determination of what is good or bad a lot of the times, especially in our discussions, is like the selflessness versus the selfishness. And he certainly is just doing things that he wants to do when he wants to do them, no matter what.
Yeah, screw anybody else.
Yeah,
You know,
literally.
don't get in his way. Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, how many times does he cheat on Hera?
He
Hera.
does everything with everyone, but especially Hera, and like
Yeah.
she knows it all the time, and she goes. Oh, side note, just for this little portion, since we're on this topic, the
Uh-huh.
story of Hercules makes me laugh so much. The Disney version, because a lot of the stuff that happens in for Hercules, a lot of the hurdles that he has to leap over, in the real story of Hercules, is because of Hera, because she's jealous. She's jealous of Hercules, and it's all of the Hera's been doing this. And I just think that's so funny that like that's how that was portrayed, when really, that's
Yeah.
that's not
He
it at
shouldn't
all.
have had to go through that. It's just because
Yeah, or the reason, the things that were happening in the movie were much more about like Hades and the
Mhm.
other like monstrous things that were happening. I thought that was a very
Yeah.
interesting tidbit. That was really, technically Zeus had a lot of fault in there, because he went and diddled other people while he was married to his wife Hera, whom he seduced unwantingly anyway. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and, I just can't with Zeus. He reading up on him, it just really makes me hate him, and
yeah.
it makes me it's very interesting to me that the Greeks even chose that personality as one of their gods.
Mhm.
It's fascinating to me that that's the kind of stuff that they gave him as his personality, you know? And it makes me wonder what that says about a lot of ancient Greek culture and
Yeah.
how what was happening and what was accepted and you know what I mean? Because if that's the example, gods are kind of created to be an example for humanity
Mhm.
and tell you how to live. And if that's the example, you have to wonder what life was like, you know,
Yeah.
for in reality. Like what was life like for a lot of Greeks, especially Greek women.
Yeah, well, and particularly like what their priorities must have been and how that would have affected them. Because I mean, with what we know about Zeus, that he was very promiscuous and selfish kind of god. I think the things that he was really worshipped for were like wisdom, awareness, weather, authority, destiny, and like going to battle and
Control.
winning. Yeah, anything involving control. So it's like, what must your priorities have been to be that? In strange contrast to like Zeus being this great entity that is, with all of this backstory and all of these facets to him. It's strange that what I found was that Zeus particularly wasn't the most worshipped. I think that like the first temple of his, or the first construction of worship for him, wasn't even until like 6 BCE or something like that. Sometime much later in time than you'd think for the Greeks to have built something in the name of Zeus to go worship for him.
Mm,
Whereas the females were actually a bit more well known, or at least renowned, in terms of worship. So I think there are a lot more places to worship for Hera, which was the seventh wife of Zeus. I think probably the most well known one. Um,
mhm,
and she, I think, was like the goddess of like abundance and like family, and I know a lot to do with marriage and
mm.
it's stuff in that respect. So I'm sure that's a big reason to why she was worshipped so much, because those obviously were probably things that were very important to people at that time. But Zeus was definitely more worshipped for like the brawnier things like battles and power and winning. So and also Persephone, I think that people didn't really worship Hades so much. Like even though he was the wealth bearer, the wealth bringer, they kind of worshiped.
And the personality. He had the personality. Persephone really didn't have much of a personality.
I didn't think Hades really had much of a personality either. I thought he was
Well,
kind of like
he had
cold.
more of the backstory, like you were saying for
True.
Zeus. He has more of the actual like history
True.
that
Yeah.
we have.
So you'd think that it would really be, Hades that is known and worshipped, but really it was Persephone, and I'm sure again has to do a little bit more of what she's known for. But I did not look too far into that, as that was not our topic for today. So.
But yeah, it is interesting to note that even then the Greeks were worshiping the women, even though they didn't have the backstories and they didn't have, as much of the power in terms of their religion, right? They didn't believe the women had as much power as the men, but then they were worshipped more. It's very fascinating. So, and it does, again, it makes me wonder about Greek society and how they felt like,
Yeah.
women were clearly head of household even though men were in charge. It had to have been that same kind of dynamic, because that's what you see, right? Like the gods are kind of, the humans are emulating the gods.
Yeah.
So it would have been the same type of thing. So yeah, it's very interesting. Very interesting to go back and look through. So Zeus, who has many loves, many wives, many trysts, whatever you want to call them, and many heirs, produces plenty, spreads his seed around, if you want to say that.
Yeah.
Has Hera, his wife, who has a son, self-produced son, and Zeus is like, oh heck no. Which I find like, really? She can't have a self-produced son. You have,
Well, it was either because he was ugly and he was like, no, and then he becomes like, deformed, or he was deformed and thus he was tossed off Olympus.
But
No,
still.
yeah, true. It's like really the one that you made yourself. Like, okay, interesting how that happened.
Yeah. So yeah, so basically the kid is either ugly or deformed, or
Lame.
I think that's what it is, right? Prior to. I think he is. There's a reason that Zeus throws him. So yeah, so anyway, he's ugly or deformed or lamed or something, and Zeus full on throws him off of Mount Olympus. He's like, no, chuck this kid off.
Yeah.
We don't need him. Like the one kid that Hera has, and he's like, yeah, not this kid.
Like, come on, like whatever. And then like they keep trying to make it up to him too, and I think he ends up like needing to marry some woman. I think it was Dione, or Aphrodite. Dione is from Roman mythology. But anyway, it was just a mess of why'd you need to do that, pal?
Yeah. It just shows you how thoughtless and selfish Zeus is. Yeah, you see him as like the head god, you see him, and so we just automatically kind of think that he must be really good, and he's like the one that rules the sky, right? So we automatically in our society kind of associate that with good. And he's just really not.
Yeah.
He's really kind of an ass.
Yeah, another little story tidbit that I just thought was very interesting was like the whole reason all of his backstory happened was because his father was told through prophecy that his children would uprise and overthrow the throne, and then the same stupid thing happens. Like the first person that he marries is Metis, and she becomes pregnant, and then he gets the same freaking prophecy that he's gonna be overthrown by one of his children. So once again, like father, like son, he devours his child, but then like out of weird godly mythology gives birth to the child anyway through his head. And I'm just like,
Yeah. Oh, I
"Wow."
forgot about that.
And that's Athena, the
Yeah.
goddess of wisdom, comes out of his forehead. But like he eats his wife too. He eats Metis as well. So he straight up devoured a pregnant lady and still gave
Yeah.
birth to this child. I'm just like, sir, at this point you could have just let her give birth. You couldn't have let her give birth to the kid, and then
Yeah.
hopefully not have eaten them. Like there could have
Well,
been better ways to handle that.
and you didn't learn from your father
I know.
trying to mess with the fates and clearly not succeeding? You were literally part of that. This isn't even like a removed story that you've only been told from when you were little. You were literally part of it.
Hmm.
You know what happened, and you still think it could turn out differently for you. And you know what's interesting about that, I will say before we like kind of finish, I what's interesting about that is that the Greeks, there's like an overarching um thing where the Greeks are kind of constantly showing you that like they have gods, but the fate is even more important. It's even more powerful. Like that's the true
Yeah.
ruler, right? Is fate. Like even the gods can't escape fate,
Yeah.
which I find really really fascinating because you would think that the gods would control that would be something that they control, but it's not. Even the gods um they have to deal with that, and they are subject to their fate, and
Yeah.
it comes out one way or the other,
So
and
that's
they make mistakes.
yeah. I think that's important. Like an important part of the mythology, the lore behind it is that that is a continuous sort of thing, even though they are gods, that they have.
Yeah, they make mistakes and they do the wrong thing, and they have consequences that they have to. And it really is more of a learning tool for people. I think that's what their religion was more based off of. It was a learning tool. And then I think the women were more of a they explained why certain things happened on Earth, like why did we have seasons and why do we have this, and
That's
you
a good way
know,
to put it, because yeah, a lot of them were more tools. A lot of the females were more like explaining that. Yeah, I like that's a good
yeah.
way to put that.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so for me, in terms of good and bad scale, I'd actually put them on the opposite of what you expect. I'd actually put Hades closer to good and Zeus closer to a little evil.
Same.
He's a
Even
little.
yeah, no,
No, go
he's
ahead.
no. I was just gonna say the even in Roman mythology with Pluto, like there's one little story that I just wanted to spit out there. You can keep this in or not
Mm,
if you don't want to, but it's
yeah.
just the one like little mythology story that I feel like I was able to find with him was the story of what's his name, Orpheus. He was like a musician, and he had a lover named Eurydice who was his lover, and she stepped on a viper and obviously went down into the underworld. And he was so distraught that he went down there and was like, "Listen, I really like her. I I'm gonna need her back." And woos him with his music, and he's like, "Sick. So you can have her back, and it'll be cool. But here's the one little thing: you got to walk all the way to the other realm, to the human realm, and she's going to be behind you when you can't turn around. But if you turn around, then she's going to have to stay down here." And he makes it all the way to the edge of like the two realms, and he's like, "This guy, I don't know if I trust him." So he turns around to make sure he's there, and then Pluto's like, "Well, what did I tell you not to do?"
I did warn you.
So she stayed there for the rest of eternity. And I just think that's funny that even in the Roman mythology, like, kind of with like Ursula, it's like, was it, the nice way to do things? Was it really anything other than him just doing his job? So even with Hades and in Pluto, like, is there ever really a moment where you're feeling like he is evil and making evil decisions, or is he just running the business?
Yeah, like I mean, technically, his job is to keep souls.
Yeah.
Take the soul and keep it, and you're asking him to do the opposite of his job. So, like, he does kind of have to give you something. You have to prove yourself somehow,
Yeah.
because really, he's not supposed to do that.
Yeah. They want to save
And
the world.
right, and they did kind of show that in Hercules. Also, he has the same kind of deal with Hercules. Like, fine, you can take Meg. You just got to dive into those souls, and they're going to make you real old. And if you can get to her and get back out with her and not die, sure, You can
Got
walk out.
it. Done.
Why not? You
True.
know?
True. Yeah.
So, and he does it because he's Hercules, of course. And I mean, Hades is pissed, but a deal's a deal,
Yeah.
you know? So, but yeah, that's true. He is a little bit more of like he's pretty simple. I guess that's what I would say.
Yes.
Zeus is not simple. He's complicated, he's hot-headed, he's selfish. Hades is kind of simple.
Yeah.
He's like, this is what I got stuck with. This is the job I have to do. I'm going to do it, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have some fun with it sometimes, but like he's not out there trying purposefully except for Persephone. He's not out there purposefully trying to like,
That's
cause everybody's grief and stuff,
yeah. That's truly other people's jobs. He's just like that. Oh, that's not what I'm here to do.
Yeah. He's the true CEO if you've ever seen a CEO. He's like, I'm just running this ship, dude. I'm just here to make sure people are doing their job. I really don't care. I'm here to be in charge. Everyone else is doing the dirty work. I'm just saying, large corporations, man, a lot of CEOs, they're kind of like that.
Mm.
Like, I don't know. I don't do the day-to-day work, guys. I'm just here. I'm here making sure the ship's still floating.
It's the face.
Yeah, yeah, I'm the face of it. Exactly. I'm the face of it. I'm here. I make sure things are happening. I go home. Except Hades doesn't go home. He lives there. But you know what I mean.
The House of Hades.
That literally is his home. So, yeah, very fascinating. The Greeks fascinate me to no end. Like the things that they came up with and a lot of the stories and stuff. We'll have to do another look maybe more at the women. Maybe we'll do a look into the women next time. Cool. Well, hopefully that was an interesting episode. I love Greek mythology, so it's fun to dive into them. And I think not everybody learns about it. Like you learn about like very surface level Greek mythology. You learn the names and not really the history.
Like what happened.
So yeah, so hopefully it's fascinating to all of you listeners that are listening and watching. I hope that you found it interesting and informative, and maybe your mind was blown too because you're a huge like Disney person, so the majority of your mythology comes from Hercules. You're like, what do you mean that's not the actual story?
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
you should go look up the actual story because it's fascinating.
It's fascinating, and it's not at all what that is. So I'm sorry in advance.
Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit like the Disney story.
Yeah.
So funny. So, all right, cool. Well, thanks again for joining us on another episode of Baphomet's Cozy Perch. I'm Caitlin.
I'm still Veronica.
And we will see you guys next time. Bye.